Here's my story, the way it really felt from the inside. Not dressed up, not fancy, just how it went down, and how I kept breathing through a night I still hear in my sleep sometimes. Act 1. The hook. The breath you hold so long it hurts. Don't say a word, I mouthed my palm over Eleanor's lips as the closet door pressed into our knees. The ocean wind pushed at the bedroom windows, that old Newport glass rattling like teeth. And somewhere out in the hallway, Victor's voice went thin and cool, the way rich men talk when they want something terrible to happen, without ever touching it. He said, "She's 47, no kids, the board's been on her case about stress. If it happens this week, it reads like a stroke. Quiet, neat." His shoes clicked down the hall, and I could picture his hand making that little cutting motion in the air, like he was trimming a hedge not planning to bury a wife. My phone sat in my apron pocket on voice memo's red dot, glowing through the cloth, my thumb shaking, but steady enough to hit record, when Eleanor grabbed my wrist. "Don't," her eyes said. "Please." But I grew up on the kind of streets that teach you quick. If you don't make a record, the powerful will write the ending for you. So I kept it rolling and listened to the man who smiled through my food, threatened to make my boss's life disappear between dinner and dawn. The thing you should know about me is that I wasn't hired for courage. I'm a cook. I make biscuits that flake just right and gravy that sets people back in their chairs. I fix lemon chicken when she has investor calls, red beans and rice when she needs comfort carrot cake on Fridays, because not everything good has to be complicated. People love you for feeding them, but they don't see you. That's the trick. Invisible gets you close enough to hear what matters. Victor said, "The trust amendment is signed. I have power of attorney for medical emergencies. Dr. Hines is ready to certify." And then he laughed soft and mean like he'd already tasted the money. I held that laugh in my mouth like a hot penny and thought, not tonight. When the call ended, his footsteps faded, and I let my hand slide off Eleanor's lips. She wasn't crying loud, just that tight, careful breathing people do when their whole world tilts and they're trying not to drop through. She whispered, "Tasha, what do we do? He knows everything. He knows I'm tired. He'll make it sound like my heart quit." I looked at the mirrored door at my own face there. Flour on my sleeve hair wrapped in a scarf, 33, and dog tired from a double shift. And I said the only thing that made sense. We act like we don't know. And we let him talk where the walls can hear. Act 2. Work receipts, and the turn that turns everything. Here's how a girl from South Dallas ends up in a Newport mansion, slipping between crystal and secrets. At 19, I was cleaning night floors at a courthouse, learning which drawers people leave half shut when they think they're too important to lock them. At 22, I was in a Jersey City soup kitchen, figuring out how to stretch a bag of onions into 400 bowls and listening to cops talk loud about cases they should have kept to themselves. Nobody looked at me long enough to remember me, and I learned to like it that way. Invisible cuts both ways. You can let it swallow you, or you can use it for cover. So that night we went downstairs like it was any Tuesday. I put a kettle on chamomile for Eleanor, because it's what she always asked for when the board had been chewing at her, and bourbon for Victor, because fake kindness has a flavor. He showed up in the doorway with roses and that grin that never reached his eyes. "There you are," he said, voice syrupy. "Busy day for you, babe. Why don't you relax? Tasha, make her that tea from Dr. Hines, the magnesium powder. He says it'll help her finally sleep." He placed a small white canister on the counter and tapped it twice with his ring. I said yes, sir, and stirred the powder into an extra mug behind the mixer, where he couldn't see the steam, then walked it to the sink and watched it swirl down. The clean mug got a tea bag honey and a tablespoon of plain powdered milk to cloud it just enough. I put a spoon next to his bourbon and a napkin under his glass, because men like Victor believe in little rituals that tell them they're important, and I wasn't about to interrupt his story with a missing napkin. All night I played dumb. I set the table. I laughed at his weak joke about her CFO. I said things like, "I'll bring dessert in 10, while my second phone sat in a dish rack on video pointed at the island, where he'd left that canister, and the little fold of papers he kept sliding in and out of his jacket. I had stuck a cheap baby monitor under the buffet 2 weeks earlier. Long story that starts with a mouse and ends with me realizing those monitors send audio to your phone without asking permission. And I paired it to a recorder app. And because sometimes the universe throws you a bone, the old house security panel, that antique thing in the mudroom, had a glitch that downloaded logs to a thumb drive automatically when someone opened the cabinet. You better believe I opened it. Around 9, he tried again. "Here, babe," he said, scooting the mug toward her with the back of his knuckles. "Doctor's orders. You haven't slept in days." Eleanor's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "You're right," she said, lifting the cup to her mouth. The rim touched her lip. I watched his pupils flare. That was enough. She set it down. I said, "Ma'am, the board package came. They need your signature on the page with the blue tab." I slid the tabbed folder between her and the drink like a shield. Victor smiled at me. That fixed, thin line he thought looked like patience, and I smiled back, all dimples. The thing about smiling is people hear what they want to in it. At 10:43, he slipped into the office and made a call, and I stepped into the butler's pantry, pulled my apron tight, and held my phone close. He said, "It's handled." She drank. "Dr. Hines will come at 6 for the pronouncement. It'll read cardiac failure secondary to stress. The paperwork is prepped." And then he said the number out loud, because greed makes people sloppy. 450 million. The amendment moves the remainder to the Lang Family Foundation. Yes, I control it. No, she doesn't know. I texted the only person I trusted to understand the size of what was happening without asking me to slow down. Not FBI. Not some TV fed. A state investigator who'd once sat with me on a milk crate behind a Newark shelter and told me off the record that people like me were the ones who saw what systems miss. Her name is Agent Maya Torres, Rhode Island State Bureau of Investigation. White sneakers, hair-up eyes that don't blink much when she listens. I wrote, "Come at 2 a.m. Bring 2 techs and a stick for a drive clone. I have audio, a substance, a schedule, and a man too proud to shut up." Between midnight and 2, I moved like I was cooking for a wedding. Everything staged, nothing wasted. I photographed the canister, the spoon, the cup rim. I took video of the date on the trust amendment in Eleanor's office safe. He'd made her sign it the day after her father's memorial, a low move even for him. I pulled the landline voicemails because rich people love landlines, and there it was. Dr. Hines' soothing voice telling Victor to make sure the housekeeper mixed the powder correctly. He didn't even use my name. Housekeeper like a tool. Maya came quiet the way good cops do when the truth is fragile. She looked at my notes. I write everything down in a dollar store notebook, time and words and who was in the room. And her mouth twitched at the corner. "How long you been doing my job, Tasha?" she said, just enough humor to let me breathe. I handed her the thumb drive, the phone, the canister, in a zip bag I'd made out of a freezer bag and tape. She said, "We'll wire the living room and the office. When he calls in the morning, we'll get him again." "You sure you're steady for the confrontation?" I said I've stood in hotter kitchens. At 5:45, the garage door rumbled and the house woke like it knew what show it had to put on. I wiped a spotless counter because that's what I'd be doing any other day. Victor walked in with that old rescue dog of theirs trailing him panting. "Morning," he said, too cheerful. "How'd you sleep, babe?" Eleanor, who'd been sitting in the breakfast nook pretending to read the business pages, folded them and smiled like steel wrapped in silk. "Like the dead," she said. Victor's eyes flashed confusion, just a hairline crack in his smugness, and then he smoothed it away. "Great. Great. I called Dr. Hines. He's on his way just to check on you. He's concerned." When the doorbell rang at 6:20, I was ready with 2 mugs and my little apron recorder bumping my ribs. Dr. Hines came in with a satchel and papers already signed. He had that careful doctor smell, mint gum and starch, and a glance that jumped around the room like it was trying not to land anywhere. He said, "Where is she?" Victor touched my elbow like I was furniture. "Go tell Mrs. Hart the doctor is here." I went to the stairs, counted to 5, then turned and watched from the shadow where the hallway meets the living room. I like to know how men behave when they think I've left. Eleanor walked in wearing a navy sweater and the calm you buy with decades of fighting boardrooms. Dr. Hines froze pen in midair. Victor said, "Thank God, I was worried sick and he almost sold it." "Almost." Eleanor said, "Tell me why my death certificate is signed." The silence that followed felt like a church when someone drops a hymn book. Maya stepped through the front door with 2 agents in plain clothes like she was arriving for brunch. "Mr. Lang, Dr. Hines," she said, letting her badge flash and then putting it away like she didn't need the shine. "We're going to have a talk about recordings, chemical agents, and a thing called conspiracy." Victor laughed one short bark. "You can't be here without a warrant." Maya nodded toward the kitchen. "There's a lot of things we can't do," she said, and then looked right at me, "but a citizen can record a conversation they're a part of. And a cook can pull a kettle just before it boils." The rest happened fast and forever. Agents took the canister. Another collected the cup. Dr. Hines tried to slide the pre-signed certificate back into his bag, like a bad magic trick. Victor puffed up. He said the line I'd been waiting for, the one I knew he'd say, because he'd said it to me a dozen times in smaller ways. "Know your place, Tasha." He jabbed a finger in my direction, without looking at me because you don't look at furniture. I stepped forward until we were close enough for him to smell the cinnamon on my sleeve. "My place," I said, "is wherever the truth needs a witness." He said more a mess of threats and names of lawyers and the kind of words men think scare you if you grew up counting quarters for laundry. The baby monitor on the buffet listened like a saint. He called the doctor stupid. He said the number again slower, each digit like a drum. He said, "She drinks, she sleeps, the state writes heart failure." And somewhere in the middle of that speech, his dog went to Eleanor and laid its head on her knee, like even animals can smell a storm. Maya nodded once, sharp. "That will do." Cuffs clicked. The house sighed. The ocean kept doing what oceans do, rolling and not caring. You think that's the end. It wasn't. It never is. Paperwork unspooled like ribbon for weeks. The trust amendment was dirty 6 ways. The foundation he'd set up was a funnel with 2 shell companies on a Caribbean island you only hear about when somebody gets caught. Dr. Hines had 3 previous certificates on wealthy women who were supposedly too tired to wake up. There were other husbands not as smooth as Victor, but just as hungry. The bureau built a chart on a wall and connected strings, and I stood there on a Tuesday with flour on my jeans and cried into a napkin because every string was a woman who'd been told to drink her tea and rest. Here's where people ask how I kept it together. The truth is, I didn't not all the time. Sometimes I sat in the pantry and counted to 100. Sometimes I talk to my grandma who's been gone 10 years, told her I was doing the right thing, asked her to stand between us and whatever shadow was in the room. Sometimes I made cornbread at midnight, because the smell of butter melting in a hot pan is proof that the world can still be simple for 5 minutes. 6 months later, everything looked different and exactly the same. The ocean still beat the rocks. The house still rattled in a south wind. But there was a scar down the middle of the life we'd lived, and you don't pretend scars aren't there. Eleanor said, "You saved my life," and I said, "You hired me, which is its own kind of saving." She offered me a job I didn't know how to name at first. Head of personal security sounded ridiculous next to the word cook. So we made a new title that made more sense. I call it protector. It doesn't fit on a business card, but it fits on a day. We built Reed protective strategies out of a folding table in a spare room while I still did breakfast, and now there's an office on a second-floor walk-up in Providence with bright plants and a coffee machine that always leaks, and 3 clients who learned the hard way that being rich doesn't mean you're safe. I still cook on Fridays because it keeps my feet on the ground, and because a lemon pie can fix things a badge can't. Victor is where men go when they forget other people are real. I won't say his name again. Dr. Hines lost his license and found out what it feels like when a courtroom looks at you like a problem to be solved instead of a voice to be trusted. People online made a circus out of the case. Headlines love a simple story with a sting in it. But what mattered to me were the messages that showed up at 2 in the morning from strangers saying, "My sister is with a man like that," or "I didn't record it, but I wish I had," or "Do you think someone like me could ever protect someone like you?" The answer is yes. The answer is you already have just by surviving. Act 3. The win that actually matters and the question I can't stop asking. You want a neat ending? We all do. I could give you the clip cuts, the cuffs, the press conference, the judge with the measured voice. But the win, the real win, was smaller and meaner and sweeter. It was watching Eleanor walk into her boardroom 2 months later with her hands steady and her voice low and kind and firm. It was the dog, old and stiff, lying at her feet while she read the quarterly report like a woman who refused to die on schedule. It was me in the back stitching my life together with every breath, knowing that I hadn't been invisible after all. I had been camouflaged, and there's a difference. One afternoon, sitting in my new office that still smells like paint, I caught my reflection in the window. The same face from that closet, just a little more tired around the eyes, a little more sure at the mouth. A messenger pinged from an unknown number. It was a housekeeper out in Ohio who'd heard the podcast about the case. She wrote, "My boss's husband keeps leaving little bottles in the kitchen and calling them supplements. He calls me girl. What should I do?" I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. The answer had to be careful, because careful is how we live, but it also had to be true. I wrote, "First, write everything you see. Time date what he said. Second, if you feel unsafe, leave. Your life is the only thing you can't replace. Third, don't drink anything anyone else brings you in a mug you didn't wash yourself." And then I added something that mattered more to me than any list. You are not the help. You are the witness. You are the person who sees. So here's the part that makes people argue in the comments, and I'm not going to dodge it. Did I cross a line by recording inside someone's house? By planting a baby monitor under a buffet? By opening a cabinet to copy logs that weren't mine? The law says one thing, ethics says another, and where I come from, survival is its own commandment. You can call me a hero if you need to, but I know what I am. I'm someone who refused to be furniture. I'm someone who decided that my hands were going to do more than stir and serve. I'm someone who believes that if you're standing in the room where a thing is happening, you have to either stop it or live with it. and I'd like to sleep at night. People still underestimate me. It's fine. I let them. I've learned to turn other people's certainty into my cover. When a door opens and a voice like Victor's floats down a hallway, I remember the closet, the breath, the way the old window shook in its frame. I remember the weight of my hand on a friend's mouth, the way fear tastes like metal, the way a plan can be a prayer if you whisper it steady. And then I do what I always did before the articles and the podcasts and the office with the plant that keeps leaning toward the light. I make a list. I check the stove. I count the cups. I listen for what the walls can hear. And I decide again that I'm not leaving anyone to drink something that was meant to make them quiet forever. If this hits you somewhere deep, if you ever got told to know your place, if somebody ever said girl like it was a leash, if you've ever had to choose between keeping a job and keeping a person alive, talk to me. Tell me what line you think I crossed or didn't cross. Tell me where you're watching from and how your town handles power when it thinks nobody's looking. Drop a comment about what justice should look like when money and medicine shake hands in the dark. Do you believe one recording can change the ending? Or does the world only shift when people like us stop being polite and start being witnesses? Like, subscribe, and more important, tell me your story. I'm listening.